The call came on a Tuesday evening in October, while I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a colander full of green beans. My son-in-law did not say hello. He never does. He said his parents were going to be staying with me, that they'd lost their rental situation in Akron and didn't have many options, and that I had 3 bedrooms and only one of me. Then he said the thing I have been turning over ever since. "You can always come stay with us if it gets too crowded for you." I said I'd think about it. "There's nothing to think about," he said. "It's just math." I didn't argue. I have learned over 64 years that arguing with a man who has already decided something is not an argument. It's a performance. And I am not a performer. I put the phone on the counter and stood there with the water still running until the colander stopped dripping. Outside, the street was quiet. The Murphys' dog was barking 2 houses down the way it does at 5 o'clock. Everything in Carver Mills, Indiana sounds the same at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday in October. And I thought, he doesn't know what's in that drawer. Welcome to Strong Mom Stories. I'm Josephine. I'm 64 years old, and I live alone in a 3-bedroom house on Wellstone Drive that my husband Ted and I bought in 1997 for $112,000. Ted died 8 years ago last March. Pancreatic cancer, 9 weeks from diagnosis to the end. He was 59. He did not get to be old. That is the fact I live with every single morning when I get up in this house by myself. I was a school principal for 22 years, Carver Mills Elementary, then Jefferson Middle School, then back to elementary because I missed the little ones. I retired in 2021. I am not a woman who sits still easily, so retirement looked like my sister's garden, the library board, Tuesday night choir, and one very important piece of paperwork I signed in the spring of 2019. That paperwork is the reason this story exists. In 2019, 2 years before I retired, my pension was set and modest, and the house was paid off, and Ted's life insurance had mostly gone to his medical bills, the way it does. I was 58. I was looking at 20 or 30 more years in this house on a fixed income. My friend Constance, who I've known since we taught together in 1985, told me her brother-in-law had done a reverse mortgage, and it had changed his life. So I went to a HUD-approved housing counselor, which the government requires before you can even apply, and I sat across a desk from a woman named Phyllis, who had reading glasses on a beaded chain and a very organized filing system, and she explained it to me clearly. A reverse mortgage lets you borrow against the equity in your home while you continue living in it. You don't make monthly payments. The loan becomes due when you sell the house, move out permanently, or die. There are rules. The house must be your primary residence. You must maintain it. And the occupancy is mine. Not a guest's, not a relative's, mine. I read every page before I signed. I keep a copy in the 3rd drawer of the file cabinet in the back bedroom, and I have read it maybe 30 times since 2019, because that is how I am. I do not scan. I read. My daughter Daphne knows the filing system. She's 38, she works in hospital administration, and she is the kind of organized that comes from growing up in a house where her mother labeled the spice rack. She helped me with the paperwork one winter when I had carpal tunnel surgery and couldn't hold a pen. She sat at this kitchen table and read me the clauses out loud, and I confirmed each one. She knows what's in that drawer. She also did not tell her husband. I need to tell you about my son-in-law Curtis before I tell you what happened in October. Not because he is a villain. He is not. He is a 40-year-old man who built a landscaping business from 2 mowers and a pickup truck into something with 12 employees, and he works genuinely hard for it. He also believes in the way some men believe things without examining them, that the world is divided into people who build things and people who create obstacles for builders. He decided some years ago that I fall into the second category. In 2019, the same year I signed my reverse mortgage, Curtis asked me to co-sign a business loan for $60,000. He wanted to buy a commercial-grade skid steer and expand into grading work. I said no. I said the house was the collateral I'd used for my own loan, and I couldn't pledge it twice. He said I was being overly cautious. I said caution had gotten me this far. He drove Daphne home that night without coming in for dinner, and he has not eaten a meal at my table since. That is 5 years. Daphne says he's busy. I stopped asking the same way you stop asking about weather you can't change. Curtis's parents are Roy and Edna Sather. Roy is 68. He spent 30 years as a warehouse foreman for a distribution center outside Akron, Ohio, and he has the posture of a man who spent those years on his feet. Edna is 65. She worked the lunch line at an elementary school for 18 years, which is, I have always thought, some of the hardest invisible work there is. She fed other people's children every day without anyone learning her name. What happened to them is the American thing that happens to people who do everything right, but not quite right enough. In 2021, they sold their house in Akron for $238,000 when the market was peaking, and everyone told them they were geniuses. They bought an RV and traveled for 18 months, which I do not begrudge them. They gave $40,000 to Curtis's younger brother for a food truck venture that lasted one summer. They paid off some medical debt. By 2024, they were renting a room in a house share in Akron with 2 other retired couples, and their combined Social Security was $2,100 a month, and their portion of the rent was $850. Daphne told me all of this in pieces, over Sunday phone calls, in the gentle way she delivers bad news, like she's laying something fragile on a table. I felt sorry for them. I want to be honest about that. I lay awake one night running numbers in my head, trying to see if there was something I could do. That impulse is where everything went sideways. Not because of Roy and Edna, because I let Curtis see me feeling it. The Tuesday call in October was not the first time the subject came up. At Easter dinner that spring, I was in Daphne's kitchen cutting fruit when I heard Curtis on the back porch on the phone. "It'll work out," he was saying. "Mom's got the space. It's just a matter of getting her to see the logic of it." He didn't know I was 6 feet away through the screen door. I kept cutting fruit. I didn't say anything. That was my mistake, and it wasn't the last one, but it's the one that let everything else happen. After I hung up in October, I dried my hands and went to the back bedroom and opened the 3rd drawer of the file cabinet. The folder is labeled with a piece of blue masking tape and a black marker. Reverse mortgage, 2019, 14 pages, my signature on 9 of them. I put it on the kitchen table and turned the overhead light on and read it the way I read a student's discipline file back when I was principal. From the beginning, no skipping, pencil in hand. I knew what I was looking for because Phyllis had explained it in 2019. Page 6, Section 4.2, Occupancy Requirements. The property must be used as the borrower's principal residence. Changes in occupancy must be reported to the loan servicer. Unauthorized non-borrowing occupants may trigger a review and, if not remedied, acceleration of the loan balance. Acceleration, that is the word. It means the loan comes due. All of it. At once. The bank that had been quiet in the background of my life for 5 years would knock on a door I could not answer. I underlined it. I wrote the section number on the back of a grocery receipt. Then I put the folder back in the drawer and called Phyllis. People always assume there was a lawyer. There was no lawyer. There was Phyllis, who is 61 and still has that beaded chain on her glasses, and who answered her work line on a Wednesday morning like it was nothing unusual that I was calling 5 years after our appointment. I asked her one straight question. She was quiet for about 4 seconds. "Josephine," she said, "if those people move into your house, you could lose your house." I thanked her and hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time without turning on the radio. Daphne came on Saturday. She brought coffee and shortbread cookies, which is what she does when she's delivering something hard. She sat at my table with her coat still on, the way she does when she's planning to leave before the conversation is over. "It's only temporary," she said, "just until they find something." I asked how long temporary was. She turned her cup around on the table. "Curtis already told them. Edna's been looking at storage units for their furniture. Decisions made before they're mentioned. That is how it works in that family." I asked Daphne to look at me. She looked at the window. "Do you remember?" I said, helping me with the loan paperwork in January of 2022 when my hand was in a brace. Her thumbnail stopped moving on the lid of her cup. Do you remember what we read in section 4.2? She didn't answer that. She took a folded piece of paper from her purse instead and slid it across to me. A list in Edna's handwriting, rounded, careful letters. Things Edna would need in her room. A small refrigerator, a chair near the window. Good curtains, blackout if possible, because Roy snores and she sleeps light. Someone had already picked which room. I folded the list and put it under the pepper grinder. I told her I needed to check something first, and I'd let her know. She was out the door in under 5 minutes. She had not answered my question. I could see on her face she hadn't forgotten. She knew. She just hadn't told him. I wrote a formal letter to the loan servicer's compliance department over 2 evenings. I explained who Roy and Edna were, what their situation was, that they were the parents of my daughter's husband, that I was asking whether they could be approved occupants. I made the case for them as honestly as I could. I included their ages, their income, the circumstances that had led to this. If there was a path to yes, I wanted to find it. I mailed it certified on a Thursday and kept the receipt. In the meantime, Roy and Edna came on a Saturday in November without calling. Roy had a tape measure on his belt, a yellow Stanley, 25 feet. He walked my hallway and measured the doorframe of the guest room. He asked which way the window faced. Edna walked straight past me and stood in the doorway of that room and looked at Ted's old reading chair that I've kept in there because I don't know where else to put it. That'll have to go, she said, to no one in particular. I need the floor space for my sewing table. She said it, the way you say something about a room that's already yours. Roy was in the garage 20 minutes later. I heard his tape measure snapping. He had measured my garage before he measured anything I might have to say. I stood in the kitchen and understood something that had been forming for weeks. This was not a conversation anyone was planning to have with me. I was the square footage. I was the math Curtis had mentioned on the phone. I served them coffee and said very little. They stayed an hour. At the door, Edna patted my arm and said, "You'll be glad of the company." It was the kindest thing she said the whole visit. I watched their car back down the driveway and then went and put Ted's chair back exactly where it was. The servicer's letter came 17 days after I mailed mine. I opened it at the mailbox. 1 page. Official letterhead. The proposed occupants did not qualify as approved non-borrowing parties under the terms of the loan agreement. Their addition to the household would constitute a change in occupancy status. If such a change occurred and was not remedied, the servicer reserved the right to initiate an acceleration review. The letter cited Section 4.2 and included a compliance department phone number. I put it in the folder with the blue masking tape. That evening, I called Curtis. I read him 2 sentences from the letter. Then I offered to email him the full document or put a copy in the mail. There was a long silence, just the sound of something running in the background. A shop vac, maybe. "That's not enforced," he said. I said the letter had a date on it and a name and a compliance department phone number. "Josephine." His voice shifted, lower. "You went and filed a formal inquiry about my parents, like they're a code violation." I told him I'd filed an inquiry for his parents. I told him I'd made the case for them as honestly as I could, and that the answer was what it was. "You could have just said no." I said I had, in fact, said I needed to check something. On the Tuesday he called, and again when Daphne came with the cookies. He said I was a woman who hid behind paperwork. I said the paperwork was the reason I still had a house. Then he said the thing that made the whole picture clear. "You're 60. 4. You're not going to be running this place on your own forever. Daphne's going to be dealing with all of this eventually. It would be a lot easier if my parents were already there." There it was, out loud, on the phone on a Wednesday in November. He did not want a sewing room for his mother. He wanted Sothers already installed in my house for the year or 2, down the road, when I had a bad winter or a bad scan, and the person making decisions would be his wife. And here is what he still did not understand, and I did not explain it that night, that this loan exists because I live here, alone, on one signature. The moment I am not the sole occupant, the ground shifts. There was no version of his plan that didn't end with me losing this house. He had been trying to hand me an exit and call it generosity. I said 9 words. Then it will have to be no from me tonight. And I hung up on my son-in-law, which I had never done in the 12 years my daughter had been married to him. I asked Daphne to come over the following Sunday. I put the folder on the table and explained it plainly. The loan. The equity I'd been living on for 5 years. What acceleration means. What losing the house means at 64. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He's going to be so angry." Not. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not. I should have told him what I knew." Her first full thought was about the temperature of her husband's reaction. If you have ever managed someone else's anger instead of telling them the truth, you already know what that costs. Not just you. Everyone around you. On Friday night before the Saturday, they were supposed to arrive with boxes. I made up the guest room. I put fresh hand towels in the guest bathroom and a small vase of carnations on the nightstand because carnations last. I put a chicken casserole in the refrigerator with an index card on top. Roy and Edna, casserole at $3.50 for 35 minutes. Please read the letter on the counter first. I mean the flowers. J. I want you to understand why a woman does that when she already knows the answer is no, because I was not certain. In 35 years of working with children, I was wrong more times than I can count, and every single time it was because I had stopped gathering information and started relying on what I already believed. I had asked the question honestly. If some provision existed that Phyllis and I had both missed, and the answer came back, yes, I was going to be a good host on day 1, not day 4. You cannot make people feel welcome after the fact. So I put the flowers there. I left at 8 in the morning and left the porch light on, which is a ridiculous thing to do in November daylight. But I did it anyway. In my rearview mirror, coming up Wellstone Drive behind me, a rental moving truck and Curtis's pickup behind it. We passed each other at the corner. I raised 2 fingers off the wheel the way you do. He saw me. I kept driving. Constance made coffee, and we sat in her sunroom and talked about her granddaughter's school play and whether the library board should add a 3rd Saturday session. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me 11 times in 40 minutes. Constance looked at it and then looked at me. "You going to get that?" "It's already answered," I said. She put her hand on my wrist and didn't say another word, and that is when I cried. 4 seconds, maybe 5. Not about the house, not about winning, about the carnations, about the fact that I had meant them completely and I needed someone to see that I had. I came home at noon. Curtis was standing in my driveway holding the servicer's letter, not the whole folder. Just that one page, held by the corner like he wasn't sure whether to keep it or put it down. I got out of my car. He said, "What is this?" I asked him to hand it back to me, and he did. I read section 4.2 aloud, in a normal voice, because the neighbors 2 doors down were raking leaves, and everyone had already heard enough anyway. "That's what's been in my file since 2019, I said. "The same year you asked me to co-sign your business loan, and I told you the house was already collateral. The same year." He said I had ambushed his mother. I said I had answered an honest question, honestly, which is the only kind of answer I know how to give. He said I was a woman who built walls out of paper and called it principle. I said, "Your way was the only way I lose this house. I'm the reason it's still standing." He hit the hood of his truck with the flat of his hand. He said I'd spent 5 years being difficult. He said I owed his family more than a form letter. I didn't answer that. I went inside. Edna was in my kitchen. She had found the casserole, and she had the index card in her hand, and she was reading it when I came through the door. She didn't turn around right away. When she did, her eyes were red. "I don't have anywhere, Josephine," she said. Very quiet. The quietest thing anyone said that whole day. I nearly went to her. "I want you to know I got within 1 step, because for 3 seconds, she was just a 65-year-old woman holding a note card with her name on it in a house she'd been promised. Then she set the card down on the counter and said, "So there's nothing you can do. You're good at forms." I set the open folder on the counter between us. I said, "I've had this loan for 5 years. Every year I sign a certification that this is my house and that I live in it alone, not because I want to keep you out. Because that certification is the only thing that keeps the loan from coming due and the house from being sold. If Roy and Edna Sather are living in this house, I lose this house. There is no version of what Curtis planned where I don't lose this house." She read the page. She reads carefully. I could tell. Then she put the index card on top of the casserole dish and pressed the corner down flat and said, very quietly, "Roy said it would be fine." "Roy didn't read it," I said. "Curtis didn't read it. I have read it 30 times. They left that afternoon." Roy put his tape measure back in his pocket without measuring anything else. He nodded at me in the doorway, which was more than I expected. Edna took the carnations from the nightstand because I told her to, because they would last another week and she deserved something that would last. Curtis has not spoken to me since. Daphne went quiet for 3 weeks, then called again on a Tuesday. She came over on a Thursday in February and sat at this table and picked up my pen from the counter and turned it over in her hands. "I should have told him what I knew," she said. I told her that was true and that she should also have told me she hadn't. Because I would have handled things differently. I would have said more, sooner, instead of letting it all pile up, went till a truck was backed into my driveway. I owe her that honesty too, and I said it out loud at that table, which is not something I have ever been easy at. For 20 years, I handed my daughter documents instead of conversations. I taught her that hard things come in writing, and that you keep your mouth shut until the paperwork is clear. Then, I was surprised she kept her mouth shut. So here is the boundary, and it is the only one I said out loud. The guest room stays made up, and it is hers whenever she wants it, and she knocks. Curtis does not come into this house. If either of them ever wants to talk about what happens to this place someday, they can start by reading Section 4.2 out loud to me. She said that was fair. She stayed until 9. We ordered pizza and sat on the couch watching something neither of us was really watching, and it was the best evening I'd had in months. The carnations are gone now. The vase is on the windowsill in the guest room with nothing in it. I walk past the door some mornings and look at it. It is proof of something I need to be able to see from the hallway. I was not being cold in November. I was being exactly as warm as I could afford to be. Which turned out to be 1 casserole, 1 notacard, and a bunch of flowers I bought for a woman who had already moved my late husband's chair off the floor plan. Nobody gives you a home. Nobody gets to take it, either. The kindest thing I have ever done for my family was to be completely immovable on page 6 of a 14-page document that I read, every single word, before I signed my name to it. If you have papers in your home you have never fully read, go read them this week, all of them, every page. Then tell me what you found. I read every comment. Drop a like, subscribe to Strong Mom Stories, and I'll see you in the next one.